Picture this. It is 1898, and you are sitting in a really crowded, smoky theater in New York City.
Oh, I love this story.
Right. So the lights go down, and the projector flickers to life, and you are about to see something utterly unprecedented.
Like genuinely mind-blowing for the time.
Exactly. You are seeing real moving footage of the massive Spanish-American war naval battle that's happening all the way down in Santiago de Cuba. You watch the battleships, you see the cannon smoke, the agitated water.
It's totally visceral.
It is. And the audience completely buys it. I mean, they accept it as legitimate on-the-ground war footage. But here is the catch. The cameramen from the Videograph company who claim to have shot this, they never filmed the battle.
Not a single frame of it. I mean, they returned from Cuba completely empty-handed.
Wow.
But the public demand for visual evidence was just so intense that a man named Edward H. Emmett in Chicago essentially birthed the special effects industry right on the spot.
Wait, how did he do that?
Well, he bought these cheap cardboard postcards of the Spanish and U.S. fleets, and he carefully cut out the ships, pinned them to corks, and literally floated them in a bathtub.
A bathtub, you're
A
kidding.
literal bathtub. And he added some, miniature explosives for cannon fire. He stirred the water to create waves, and he filmed the whole illusion.
That is wild.
It really is. And what this proves so perfectly is how quickly the invention of the camera, which is, the ultimate tool for documenting reality, was recognized as a mechanism that could also deeply manipulate it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today we are taking a deep dive into a very specific, technologically focused history of Cuban cinema. We're tracing this from the arrival of the very first camera in Havana in 1897 up to a definitive hard historical ceiling of the year 2003.
Right. 2003 is our absolute limit today.
Yes, exactly. And we are looking at this timeline not to debate politics or, ideology, but to observe a massive sociological tension. We want to see what actually happens when the unstoppable force of individual human creativity collides with the immovable object of institutional control.
It is a phenomenal case study, honestly, because when you strip away all the usual partisan framing and just look strictly at the logistical milestones, a very clear pattern emerges.
The kind of pattern.
Well, you see a continuous tug of war. So on one side, you have individual artists trying to use the lens as an unfiltered mirror of their society. And on the other side, you have infrastructure.
Right, the logistical reality.
Exactly. Whether that's early private monopolies holding the purse strings, or later on, highly centralized, state-funded administrative systems trying to control the distribution.
So to really grasp how this dynamic played out, I feel like we have to start at ground zero, right? The physical arrival of the technology itself.
Yes, let's go back to January 1897.
Which is barely 2 years after the Lumiere brothers shock Paris with their first film projection. And their representative, Gabriel Vere, steps off a boat into Havana.
I always try to imagine the technological whiplash for the local population there.
It had to be huge. I mean, a newspaper at the time was struggling so hard to explain the concept to its readers that it described the invention as moving life-size photographs projected on a quadrilateral canvas.
A quadrilateral canvas. It sounds almost magical when it's phrased that way.
It really does.
But initially, the logistics of this new medium were incredibly chaotic. I mean, it was an era defined entirely by private risk-taking.
Just individuals trying to figure it out.
Yeah, you had individual entrepreneurs importing this heavy, expensive equipment and just trying to figure out how to monetize it. By 1908, you see the formation of early distribution networks, like the Santos and Artigas company.
Okay.
And they started out just representing foreign film firms, basically managing the logistical nightmare of shipping fragile film reels across the ocean.
But they quickly realized something crucial, right? It's super expensive to import everything, and the local audience actually wants to see themselves on that quadrilateral canvas.
Exactly. They want local stories.
Which brings us to individuals like Enrique Diaz-Quesada. In 1913, he creates the first full-length fiction film on the island called Manuel Garcia.
Right.
He is building a local industry essentially from scratch, driven purely by technological curiosity and private entrepreneurship.
He absolutely was. The silent era, which stretched roughly from 1897 to 1933, was an entirely decentralized landscape.
No overarching control.
None. There was no overarching state apparatus guiding production. It was just individuals with the cameras, capturing the organic reality around them, or staging early narratives.
But here's where the story has a massive structural wall, and this is the archival tragedy.
Yeah, this part is heartbreaking.
Our sources indicate that roughly 85% of all early Cuban cinema is physically gone, just vanished.
Poof.
Diaz-Quesada's own original negatives literally went up in smoke during a fire in 1922. So today, if you want to study that entire silent phase, you are looking at like a 1906 documentary short, a handful of scattered fragments, and a single surviving feature film.
Ramon Peon's La Virgen de la Caridad from 1930.
Right, that's it.
The physical loss of cultural data there is staggering. Nitrate film stock was highly unstable. It was incredibly flammable. And without institutional preservation structures in place, the physical history just simply disintegrated or burned.
I have to pause here, though, because this raises a huge methodological red flag for me.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it like this. If I accidentally drop my only external hard drive into a river, and I only manage to salvage, say, 3 random JPEGs,
Right, okay.
I can't look at those 3 pictures and claim they represent my entire life. So if we are missing 85% of the historical data from this era, aren't we just analyzing the lucky survivors? How can we accurately map the origins of an industry when the vast majority of the evidence is literal ash?
That is a totally fair question. But think about the mechanics of early business for a second.
Mm.
The celluloid burned, yes, but the paper trail did not.
Ah, the paperwork.
Exactly. This is why a rigorous logistical approach is so important here. We aren't just relying on the surviving 15% of the film stock. We have the ledgers.
Ah, that makes sense.
We have the commercial contracts of companies like Santos and Artigas. We have the contemporary newspaper reviews, the equipment import manifests. And that data cross-references perfectly to show us the infrastructural reality.
Which is what?
That this foundational era was built entirely on individual commercial initiative, independent of state structures.
The paperwork outlives the art. That makes perfect sense. So we have this wildly unregulated silent era, but eventually the technology evolves and the sheer cost of making a movie just skyrockets. Because in the late 1920s, the movies start talking.
Yes. The transition into the commercial sound era, which is roughly 1932 to 1959, completely changed the logistical landscape.
Because sound is expensive.
Highly expensive. Sound required massive capital investment. You needed soundproof studios, you needed expensive microphones, and entirely new projection systems for the theaters.
Right.
The technical leap in Cuba happens when Lita Forrest brings his phonofilm system to Havana in 1926. And by 1937, Ernesto Caparrós directs the island's first full-length talkie, La Serpiente Roja.
And when the technology demands more money, the infrastructure mutates to provide it. Suddenly, you have this massive influx of private funding.
Huge amounts.
In 1938, a company called Películas Cubanas S.A. is formed with around $350,000 in private and subsidized backing, which in the 1930s, that is an astronomical amount of cash.
It really is. But the market dynamics are brutal. The local audience just isn't big enough to support that kind of overhead, and they actually go bankrupt by 1940.
Wow, just 2 years later.
Yeah. But even though the production companies were failing, the physical exhibition infrastructure was booming.
The theaters, right.
Yes, the 1940s bring the construction of these spectacular, massive Art Deco movie palaces. You have the America Theater in 1941. You have the Radio Centro, which is now the Yara, built in 1947.
And these are huge buildings.
Massive. These buildings held upwards of 1,600 seats.
And you have to fill those seats,
Yep.
which leads to a flood of highly commercialized light musical comedies. Fluff, essentially.
Escapism.
Right. But amid all that glamorous commercial trivia, we see a stark deviation. We see the lens being used as a harsh social mirror. I'm looking at 1955 and a documentary called El Megano, directed by Julio Garcia Espinosa, and this is definitely not a musical comedy.
Far from it. El Megano captured the visceral, almost subhuman conditions of coal miners working in the Ciénaga de Zapata region.
Wow.
It was entirely uncompromising. I mean, the filmmakers took their cameras into the dirt, documenting a deep societal fracture that the commercial industry was just completely ignoring.
And the institutional response was immediate, right? The day after it was screened at the University of Havana, the negative was seized by Fulgencio Batista's repressive forces.
Yes. And if we analyze that seizure strictly through the lens of sociological neutrality, what we were looking at is a top-down mechanism of administrative restriction.
A mechanism of administrative restriction.
Exactly. The state authorities applied a criterion of information control to suppress an inconvenient reality. It was a direct institutional response to an individual artist capturing a truth that countered the official narrative.
Which brings up a fascinating paradox about infrastructure for me.
What's that?
Well, you have hundreds of thousands of dollars pouring into these massive 1,600-seat Art Deco theaters showing light comedies. Meanwhile, the most culturally significant film of the era, this gritty coal mining documentary, is shot on a shoestring budget and instantly suppressed.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, does massive capital actually build a meaningful film industry, or does it just build a very glamorous waiting room?
The waiting room analogy is incredibly apt, actually. The capital built the projectors and the plush seats. It created the platform.
But not the substance.
Right, the actual artistic momentum, the willingness to point a camera at the organic truth of a society that relied entirely on individual human beings. The infrastructure cannot generate the genius, it can only host it, or, in the case of El Magano, attempt to dismantle it.
So we move from the private commercial monopolies of the 1950s into a seismic logistical shift. Post-1959, the entire landscape is fundamentally rewired.
Completely transformed.
We enter an era of consolidated, state-funded cinematography with institutional dissemination objectives. This is marked by the establishment of the Cuban Institute of Cinematographic Art and Industry, or ACAIC.
And the consolidation here was absolute. The post-1959 administrative framework took over the entire logistical network.
Everything.
Everything. We were talking about centralizing the film stock, the cameras, the editing days, the theaters, and the salaries of the filmmakers themselves.
Wow.
The state became the sole infrastructure. And crucially, this new framework exercised the exact same kind of systemic information control we saw in the 1950s.
Right, because in 1961, just a few years into this new system, a documentary short called PM was banned.
Yes.
And it was just footage of people drinking and dancing in bars around Havana. But applying that same sociological neutrality, we have to look at the banning of PM as another mechanism of administrative restriction. The overarching system of institutional curation simply changed its ideological clothing, but the bottleneck remained.
The institution determines what gets developed and what gets distributed. But here is where the historical data reveals an incredible outcome.
What's that?
Despite operating within an incredibly rigid, centralized administrative framework that actively restricted information, the subsequent years produced an absolute explosion of universally acclaimed masterpieces.
This is the part that genuinely astounds me.
It's remarkable.
You have directors whose every reel of film is paid for by a state bureaucracy, yet they are creating global landmarks of cinema. Tomás Gutiérrez Alea directs Memorias del subdesarrollo, which is routinely ranked by global critics as one of the most important political films ever made.
Absolutely.
Humberto Salas directs Lucia. Santiago Alvarez fundamentally redefines the entire genre of war documentaries with works like Hanoi, Martes 13. How is this happening?
And it wasn't just the directors either. You had this sound experimentation group, led by Leo Brouwer, completely revolutionizing the sonic landscape of these films.
Oh, right.
You had individual graphic artists operating within the state apparatus who designed these silkscreen movie posters that were so visually striking they are currently archived in the world's most prestigious art museums.
But help me reconcile this tension, because it feels like watching water find microscopic cracks in solid concrete.
That's a good way to put it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If the state controls the budget, the distribution, and has already proven it will ban films like PM, how do these individual visionaries manage to create such raw, unfiltered, internationally recognized art? Why do they just become bureaucratic mouthpieces?
Because we have to explicitly decouple the institutional funding from the artistic achievement. A state bureaucracy can buy a tripod, but it cannot mandate a masterpiece.
Can't mandate a masterpiece. I like that.
The administrative framework provided the logistics, but the international acclaim was strictly the triumph of individual human talent.
Individual sovereignty.
Exactly. Visionary artists have this uncanny ability to capture the organic human condition, often by subtly subverting the very administrative boundaries they are hired to work within. They use the state's cameras to explore complex, sometimes deeply critical human truths. The lens always remains an individual tool, no matter whose name is on the budget sheet.
The lens remains an individual tool, but what happens when the concrete hardens around that water?
Wow.
Because the historical record shows that this delicate balance doesn't last forever. As we move into the late 1970s, the institutional grip tightens significantly.
It does. We see a very clear, documented faltering in the historical timeline. Between 1975 and 1980, a body called the National Council of Culture significantly restricted the freedom of initiative that these filmmakers had previously navigated.
So they clamped down.
Yes. The top-down directives became much more rigid, and the result was immediate. Production slowed. The international cinematic boom faltered.
Which objectively proves the core thesis we've been tracking today. The creative vitality of an era does not stem from the efficiency of state control. It relies entirely on the sovereignty of the individual creator.
Exactly.
When the institution tightens the leash, the art simply suffocates.
It really does. However, the infrastructure did continue to evolve in other ways during this time. The 1980s saw the establishment of vital educational logistics.
Like the film schools.
Yes. The International School of Cinema and Television, the ESCTV, was founded in San Antonio de los Baños in 1986. And the Higher Institute of the Arts, ISA, integrated a media faculty in 1988. So the technical training ground was formalized, but the entire game changes again in the 1990s.
Right. Driven this time by severe economic collapse.
Exactly.
The 1990s hit and the state simply runs out of money. The administrative framework can no longer afford to maintain its absolute monopoly on production. The budgets just dry up.
Completely.
So if you are a filmmaker trying to work in this decade, you have a massive problem. How do you get film stock? How do you pay your crew?
You have to decentralize. You have to look outward. Filmmakers adapted economically by securing foreign service contracts and, most importantly, international co-productions.
Right, outside money.
Yeah, they brought in outside capital to fund their projects. And the most famous example of this mechanism is the 1993 film Fresa y Chocolate, directed by Gutierrez Olea and Juan Carlos Tabillo.
That's a huge one.
Huge. By utilizing international co-production, they achieved massive global acclaim, including an Oscar nomination.
But it's not just about the money, is it? The mechanism of the co-production fundamentally alters the power dynamic, because if foreign money is funding the project, the local institution loses its ultimate veto power over the content.
Precisely.
The financial sovereignty allows the filmmakers to bypass the local administrative restrictions.
That is the crucial mechanical shift. Financial independence, even if it was just partial, bought them narrative independence.
Right.
And they used that independence to turn the camera back into an uncompromising social mirror during a period of profound societal trauma.
Because the 1990s were an incredibly raw, painful time on the island. You have deep societal fractures, mass emigration waves, specifically culminating in the 1994 Rafters crisis.
It was a very dark time.
And the filmmakers didn't look away. They used their newly leveraged independence to document the psychological toll of this era. You see this visceral reality captured in films like Fernando Perez's Madagascar in 1994 and La Vida es Sifbar in 1998.
And following our strict operational parameters today, we trace this specific wave of social realism directly up to the film Lista de Espera in the year 2000, which brings our timeline to its hard historical ceiling in 2003.
Right, our stopping point.
We do not analyze beyond that point. But looking at that final decade leading up to our boundary, the pattern holds perfectly. The institution faltered economically, but the individual human talent once again found a logistical workaround to capture the unfiltered truth of their society.
It is a phenomenal arc. I mean, think about the journey we've just mapped out for you, the listener. We started in 1897 with Gabriel Vare projecting silent novelties on a canvas. We sifted through the ashes of a completely lost silent era. We watched Batista's forces seize the raw truth of coal miners, and we watched a post-1959 bureaucracy try to institutionalize a golden age, only to have individual geniuses transcend those boundaries. The absolute through line of this entire history is clear. The lifeblood of cinema is never the private monopoly of a 1910s distribution company, and it is never the administrative framework of a state bureaucracy. It is always, undeniably, the individual human being standing behind the tripod.
Well said.
So the next time you sit down to consume any piece of media, I want you to look at the screen and ask yourself, am I being fed an institutional narrative, or am I witnessing an individual's unfiltered truth?
I will leave you with one final thought to ponder regarding that truth. We established earlier that roughly 85% of early silent films physically vanished, and that vital, inconvenient truths like El Megano and PM were actively suppressed by top-down curation in their respective eras. So if our understanding of history is largely dictated by the surviving 15% of celluloid, how much of our global collective visual memory is just a heavily curated illusion?
Oh, wow.
And as we live our lives in an entirely digital age, we have to wonder what raw, inconvenient truths are being administratively restricted into the digital trash bin today without us ever knowing they existed.
That is a chilling, necessary question to end on. A massive thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the lens, keep looking for the individual behind the camera, and we will catch you next time.
Until then, keep exploring.